What's going on, guys? It's Gary DMG. I'm back with a video. In this video, I wanted to talk about the Book of Enoch. And you know what's crazy about the Book of Enoch? It's it amazes me how they tried to cut it out of biblical history, even though it perfectly lines up with everything that's in the Bible. I mean, and then again, we always do this in Christian culture. I realize is that we always say, oh, well, what matters is the salvation. What matters is the gospel. That's all that matters. Which is right. That's the gospel truth in the end of the day. And that's what we're supposed to follow as human beings. But at the same time, there's stuff on the outside of that biblically happened. You know what I mean? Even though it doesn't regard the gospel, it still has a lot to do with the events around it. Right? So naturally, the Book of Enoch is credible. It's canon. You know what I mean? It's outside credible, as I call it. Outside credibility. And basically, what it talks about is, a lot of Egypt, even. I know that there's a lot of, if you read throughout the Bible, there's a lot of events that take place in the Middle East. That's pretty much my bottom line. And what I'm getting at here is, nobody knows who built the pyramids, nobody knows who did this or did that or did these teachings, but yet you had these advanced beings, the Watchers, and the fallen angels that fell, right? And they taught man how to build these things. They taught man advanced machinery, advanced technology, and everything like that, like the Anunnaki and stuff like that. So it's if you connect all those pieces together, you wonder why humanity's where we're at now, and why we're repeating the days of Noah, and we're right back to it's a circle of life, as you call it. And it's crazy too. I was doing some more research, and I found out that not only did fallen angels mate with the daughters of man and make Nephilim, but there was also human animal hybrids. And what's crazy about that is because throughout Egyptian history, they depict a lot about human animal hybrids. I mean, look at your Sphinx. You know what I mean? Your Sphinx is one of them. Nobody even knows how that came to be. You know what I mean? Not from my knowledge, anyways. I'm not some historian, and I'm not some person trying to confirm or steer anyone from the narrative. I'm just a theorizer. This is just a theory video. But even if you look at depictions of, Egyptian history, you can see they had human-animal hybrids around. I mean, I don't know if it's these guys here, the blue figures, and it's not the angels on the outside of the firmament, depicted as in the photo. But if you look here, you see depictions of human, but you also see depictions of half-breed human and animal, and it's known a lot throughout history. You know what I mean? So if you look at Egyptian history and you realize about human animal hybrids, and if you read the Book of Enoch and you start to realize about the characters of the manticore and stuff like that, with the tails and whatnot, and then you go and you look at Egypt and you see things like these Egyptian figures, for example. They were literally worshipped as gods, false gods, right? But at the same time, they were a mix of human-animal hybrid, just like how the Book of Enoch describes. So if you take I forgot the name of this one, but if you take Horus, for example, a lot of people thought that Horus was a depiction of Jesus Christ, or somebody of that nature, but predominantly, a lot of these gods were depicted as animals. You know what I mean? And so it's it begs the question on how it came to be, and how history sort of meshes into itself. It's kind of crazy to think about. That's why whenever I do research about the Book of Enoch, it's just so much thoughts come up, so many theories come up, because we don't really we don't really understand the history as much as we think we do. But we know the gospel well. You know what I mean? We know the correct doctrine. We know the correct narrative. You know, that Christ had died for us and he sacrificed for us and, you know, all that stuff. But it's crazy how the book of Enoch sort of really lines up a lot with Egyptian history and Egyptian lore. And also even Roman lore, too. Because remember, we have to assume that these fallen angels were all over the world. And I'm pretty sure, like, in a lot of human history, there is depictions of animal-human hybrids. I think that's just crazy to me. Like, it's like, it makes you wonder what those days were actually like in the days of Noah. Because, like, it just, like in Genesis, it just tells you how there was Nephilim walking the earth. But at the same time, like, there's so much other stuff walking around and so much stuff that existed at that day. And it's like, it makes you wonder, like, what type of technology they had, you know, what they had, because there was, like, a whole bunch of ancient civilizations that got taken out in that flood. You know what I mean? So it really makes you wonder what exactly existed back then. And it makes me wonder that if there was ever, you know, a century past from now, or centuries past from now, like, would human beings look at something that was, like, ruined like this, along the lines of, like, a remote or something, and be like, you know, make their depictions on what history was, you know what I mean? But little did they know, we used it for just, you know, simple things. Or something of, like, along the lines of, like, you know, of nature that wouldn't be understood in, like, a century and centuries from now. It's kind of, it's interesting to me how a lot of ancient history was taken out. And a lot of ancient history was wiped out during this flood because, think about it, God came down and he swiped the whole map. He hit Control-Alt-Delete on everything. He reset the whole board. You know what I mean? Including the things that were hidden in history that we didn't know, that the ancient indigenous peoples, you know, praised as, you know, gods per se, falsehood gods, because of the fallen angels that came down and made these characters. You know what I mean? It makes you wonder. And they did stand upright. You know what I mean? And even in the, I gotta bring out scripture to support this. Even in the book of Daniel, the book of Daniel even talks about, I bring up the book of Daniel a lot because there's just so much in there that really explains a lot. And, like, if you read about it, it talks about how there was a depiction of animal-human hybrids, even though I think they were depicted as, like, angels mostly, but it's just an example. It's not really a support to the claim, but it's like just a supporting example on how these characters were basically, they became lore. You know what I mean? They became lore. They became something of the sort to where it's incorporated into our history. Because if you read Daniel 7:3 or 7:4, it says the first was like a lion and it had eagle's wings, right? And then it was lifted up from the earth and it stood up upon 2 feet as like a man. So you see the depictions. And now this could be a representation of something or a metaphor, I believe, but you can decipher however you want. But the fact that it was depicted as an animal man hybrid that could stand upright, you know what I mean, just shows you that these angels were a lot more than we thought that they were. So much so that when they fell, man seen them as gods. You know what I mean? They did false worship. You know what I mean? They broke the 10 Commandments naturally. So therefore they suffered God's wrath back in those days. So it's like, it makes you wonder, like, how those days really were back then. And, like, what they were actually worshiping. As opposed to, like, you know, the holy, holy Heavenly Father. That's all mighty, all, you know, the Alpha and Omega. Because these guys, they weren't, obviously. But there was beings at the time that were cast from above, and they brought that divine nature to man and God's creation. You see how like it sort of all falls in on itself, like historically, and it's crazy how the Book of Enoch sort of ties it all together in a beautiful bow. And honestly, I never personally like read more of the Book of Enoch, but I did a lot of research regarding the book, and it just really supports the lore of Egyptian history. It supports the lore of even Chinese history, you know, and potentially others. Because think about it, we had multiple angels come down from Earth, or come down to Earth in multiple regions of the world, you know, and they advanced human technology back in those days. They did many things, you know, and it just begs the question, what exactly went down back in those days? Because it just seems so significant to not ignore, especially when you look at history and you start to connect the dots. You know what I mean? But yeah, guys, that's pretty much the conclusion of this video. I just sort of wanted to dive into like a theoretical ideology behind, you know, our history, you know, and something. If you ever realize there's a pattern, most of this history is either forgotten about or mistaken as metaphoric, or it's just totally, you know, obsolete, and they try to, you know, eject the whole idea in its entirety. You know what I mean? So that's where it's like, it makes you wonder what really happened back then. But let me know what you think down in the comment section down below, guys. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.